right. Well, welcome, and thank you for joining me on this next podcast episode, which features my friend Noelle from Frank News. We talk a lot about what's going on today, and primarily with the focus of the labor movement. We also talk about some generational stuff and things that we have problems going on and whatnot. And so I wanted to bring this particular, what I will say is a shorter form conversation between me and her, out to the podcast platform. I hope you like it. If you got any comments, questions, concerns, you can either leave them in wherever you're consuming this or go to thewealthyironworker.com, go to the contact page and connect with me there. All right, so let's get into this podcast episode with me and Noelle from Frank News.
Okay, awesome. Okay, anything else, or I can just sort of dive into these questions and pretend we are live?
Yeah, well, just go ahead and dive right in and let's see where the conversation takes us. By the way, I did look over your questions, but I'm not doing any research. So if going forward, if what this helps is that a lot of the information you're going to see is just going to come off the cuff.
Yeah.
Based upon what I've been reading or looking or anecdotally what I know from, 20 some years of being in the field and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, cool. I think that's great. Okay, cool. Well, super excited to speak with you today. Thank you for being here and letting us pick your brain a little bit. I think it might be nice to start by introducing yourself, and I'd love to hear about your work and how you got into it and that sort of thing.
Sure. So my name is Rusty Carter. I am a 23. I just started my 24th year. So I'm a union iron worker and have been, my entire, basically almost my whole adult life. But I didn't get into it. Like, when I graduated high school, no one said, hey, here's this other avenue other than college. I'm not anti-higher education, but I am you have to go to college to get a good job. It's not true, but it's a 4+ decade experiment that the cultural narrative has been spun. So I got into the trade actually by accident, but I enjoy learning. So I'm always reading. I'm always researching. I have a website that I've had for about 8 years now over at The Wealthy Iron Worker. And then about 2 years ago, almost to the month, I kicked off a podcast, and I enjoy the podcast. I enjoy, having conversations and talking, but I enjoy writing more. For whatever reason, writing just seems to resonate. But in any case, I've been doing this podcast. I took about a year break. Had a family loss that we were dealing with, so navigated through that. Yeah. Back behind the microphone, talking about, just about anything, but really from a skilled trades perspective, because that's where I, kind of reside in. Mm-hmm. And so it's been a fun few years of really kind of doing some of this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's cool. And I think especially now it has a lot of sort of cultural resonance. I think more than ever, people are talking about skilled trades. I'd love to hear more. Like, do you have a family legacy within trades? Were your parents involved in ironworking at all? Or how did you, get into the line of work?
Sure. So I am, you'll hear like some people that'll come in and like, I'm a 3rd generation iron worker or 3rd generation electrical, an IBEW, but that's not me. I'm 1st generation. My dad did body work. So he worked on cars, and interestingly enough, his dad worked on cars, but I don't know any family members that were per se in the trades like we are. So I've got 2 brothers. I'm an iron worker. My brother's a pipe fitter. My middle brother's a pipe fitter, and my youngest brother is a high voltage lineman. So all 3 of us are in the trades. All 3 of us are, obviously able to provide. So, but I was doing, I did the exact thing that a lot of people are told to do by adults that are supposed to have their best interest in mind, which is you got to go to college to get a good job. So I did. I was going to community college, and I had a kid very young. And there something just, between working and all this other stuff, something had to give. And that's what gave. College was off by the wayside. And so I'm doing in my area, there's a lot of shipyards. So we're, kind of working in the shipyard, just kind of doing whatever. And the company that I was working with, they were also, this was right around 2000. So there was this gigantic I don't want to say push, but the industry was, you started seeing tower work happen all over the place because there was a lot of towers going up for the lines and antennas for cell phones and all that kind of stuff. And so they had a telecom division, and I got started doing that. Got used to heights, got used to rigging, got used to doing, well, all that stuff. And then I was tired of traveling because I had a young kid. And so I came back home to the area and found out about the ironworkers and went down, talked to them, and it wasn't long before I got a call, went to work, and have been working ever since. And like I said, that was about 24 years ago now. It's about
Mhm.
2002 is when it was. So,
Yeah. What
yeah.
keeps you there from like a job perspective?
I, so there were some discussions when I was younger where, like, for example, my mom said something to the effect of, because I didn't really have I had a great childhood, but my adult relationships with them has been very, very strained.
With
And
your family?
they thought, oh, it all has to do with my kid.
Mm.
So, but they thought that I was going to go into something with computers, something like that. They didn't never thought that I was going to be an iron worker. And I'm like, well, number one, I was like, well, that just goes to show you how much you know about me. But it's like, I've my brother is both of my brothers are far more mechanically inclined than I am. The youngest, he could probably tear apart a motor and all this sort of stuff. And I could, but it would take me way longer, and I detest working on vehicles. So this whole point isn't about vehicles so much as it is I've had to, like, I've earned my time in this. And being an apprenticeship instructor, it has provided me, quite frankly, with, my wife and I have been married for 15 years. She's been a stay-at-home mom the whole entire time.
Mhm.
Homeschools our kids, takes them all kinds of places. They get to enjoy a lot of freedom. It has afforded me and them that type of lifestyle. And then of course I'm very, very pro union in that regard. So I'm always looking how to mentor, how to develop, how to promote the message, if you will. And I don't mean like in a like superb militant way, just an educational piece, right? Just a how do I talk to individuals who, because that's what I've found is that the vast majority of individuals just don't know. There
Mhm.
are some anti-union people out there, and you're likely not to get through to them, but that's like talking to a rock. But there's a whole host of people who just don't know. They don't know what they don't know. They've fallen for so much propaganda, been effective over the years, and they just don't know. And so, it's afforded me a good life, and I want to reach as many people as possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I like at the risk of sort of over explaining or being too specific, think it might be helpful to sort of explain, I guess, what specifically the union has done within this field that has sort of afforded you this good life. Because I do think people know broadly, a union advocates for you, or at least most people know that. But specifically, like the mechanisms they can pull to sort of like, yeah, make sure your job is good. I think is interesting.
Yeah, well, if we don't have to take, like, turn the time dial back so far, but everything that we've enjoyed so far that we take for granted, I wish labor history was actually taught in school, because then people would really understand what we take for granted when it comes to the 40-hour work week, or the fact that you got weekends, or the fact that there's no child labor, or you know safety is a enormous thing that was never really prioritized by companies and owners. And I don't want to bash companies and owners, but I want to make sure that I'm very clear on that, because I want to talk about how there's mutual benefit in that regard, especially in this day and age. But between all of that, when it comes down from a personal perspective, um, there was the fact that there's a registered apprenticeship program. So we'll start off with just where I started out at, which was the registered apprenticeship program, which is, I'm not paying a trade school for them to teach me something and then turn around and try to find a job, because the trade school model is drastically different than a registered apprenticeship program. a registered apprenticeship program, I go to school and they teach me, and then I'm paid to go to work and work for the contractors that I'm working for. And
And so
so,
the union is like establishing that program.
absolute. The registered apprenticeship program is the gold standard with the Department of Labor. Now, this is so, and let me make sure I'm very clear on this too. The type of registered apprenticeship program and union I'm talking about are the building trades. So you're talking iron workers, pipe fitters, electricians, elevators. These are the individuals, not necessarily, and there's nothing wrong with like the UAW or anything like that, but it's the setup is different. The way that it's structured and functioned. But because we're talking about the trades, and that's where I happen to reside in, the registered apprenticeship program model, which was under attack several years ago, is the gold standard, still remains the gold standard. And just at base level, that's where I started at. And so I'm going to work and I'm learning in the classroom, and it's giving me an opportunity to do these things. And then on top of that, the way the benefits are structured. You know, there's a whole podcast episode. I think I might even have an article too. But there's a whole podcast episode describing the difference, the way the pay structure is between, like, let's say a union iron worker, a union pipe fitter, a union electrician, and their non-union counterparts, and quite frankly, most of the way America and their benefit structure is set up. There's so much more that's advocated for and the way that the union pay structure is done. And so because of that, and the fact that we'll say a rising tide lifts all boats, even individuals who are not represented by a union benefit by other people around them being in a union, right? You saw this when even before, so once the UAW won concessions from the big three up north, every single U.S. Southern automaker, before, some of them even before the announcement come out, they were like, we're raising wages. We're raising wages. Boop, boop, boop. Hyundai was like 25% over the next 4 years. Why? Why are they doing this? Number one, those non-union automakers, the employees, get the benefit of the fact that there are some union individuals making money. But the secondary benefit of this is that what they were trying to stave off is union elections, because those employees are going, look at this. Those guys up there are making money because they're in a union. And so Volkswagen is the in Chattanooga, which they voted to be represented, are now authorizing a strike because Volkswagen is not dealing with the thing, not dealing with the contract, whatever their contract disputes are. I haven't looked too much into it, but interestingly enough, side note, every single one of those Southern automakers are union in their home countries. Germany, Japan, South Korea, they're all represented by a union, except here in the Southern United States.
I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but is it the same process in other countries where you're voting to unionize place by place?
It can be. There's difference. Like, I think Germany, I'm trying to think back to a labor relations class that I took. I think Germany does. So there's sectorial bargaining where an entire sector can do some bargaining, and then there's like industrial type of bargaining where, like in this case here, it's like, okay, it's very site specific or whatnot, right? Whereas it's different. And then, quite frankly, there are some governments. We're the most, from a governmental perspective, we're probably the most anti-union when it comes to that. And I think that's fully because the corporations have effectively, they've purchased politicians, is really what it boils down to. There's a lot more, the governments across the world, especially all the first world developed countries, they seem to be far more invested, at least the direction for labor. They seem to be far more invested in the success of the economy. Doesn't work. Let me say it this way. The economy is not set up, the people of that country are not set up to support the economy. The economy is set up to support the people living. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Flip it on its head. That
Yeah.
we have it completely backwards here in the United States for a lot of ways. A lot of ways, the economy is we're holding up the economy. The economy is the thing that American people need to support, as opposed to the economy working for the American people.
Yeah.
The vast majority of us.
Yeah, I just recently read a stat in this New York Times article I read that said currently about only 40% of American workers have jobs that pay a decent wage, provide fair treatment, offer some degree of autonomy, include advancement opportunities, and nearly half believe they would struggle to find one.
Hmm.
Um, so it is just sort of like, I feel like what you were just describing. It's a society that is bound to like the market and not necessarily like bound to a social contract of making sure people are able to find
Yep.
livable wage jobs. And it seems, especially with this, I think it happened to blue collar workers like intensely in the 90s and with NAFTA. And now it seems like maybe it's happening to white collar workers with
Yep.
the surge of AI. So yeah, it's an interesting place that we're in right now, and I'm curious what you make of that stat.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised by it, right? The I wish I could take credit for what I just got done saying, but I was wrapping up a book review for People Power Profits by Joseph Stiglitz, and in that there's it's not only is it what I just got done saying, but there's a basic phrase which is wealth creation versus wealth extraction, and we were part of like the post World War II, the 50s, the 60s, and some into 70s. We were far more into wealth creation, and now we're into a lot more of wealth extraction, and we're extracting a lot of the wealth out of the middle class, right? I mean, an entire economic concept called rent seeking has come up, specifically, articulating that very thing. You want to create money without creating any real wealth. And so there's a whole host of people, and I'd be curious to know if that statistic explain what generation the people are in. If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably a lot of younger people. And we could talk forever on this. But you mentioned the social compact, and that social compact, in a nutshell, the social compact is, I want better for my children than I had. And Scott Galloway talks about this relentlessly, about the breakdown of the social compact. And he's a boomer. He's the one of like the youngest boomers, right? Because their generation ended in like 1964 or 65. And he talks about how boomers have, pretty much done a tremendous number to break the social compact down. And fun fact, I didn't even know that they were called the me generation until like 2 months ago. I was doing some research on something else and I come across where they're called the me generation. I went, well, this is very fitting because that's exactly what they are. And they'll tell young people, just work harder. And it's like, you have no concept of reality today. And I'm not surprised because on one hand, you got a whole litany of individuals trying to tell you that you shouldn't have a livable wage in service industry jobs because they're just there because they're supposed to be stepping stones. But two things. I would say when the livable wage was actively discussed during FDR's time, that a livable wage meant a livable wage. And secondly, I would say to you, where are they supposed to go if these jobs are just stepping stones? You have gutted the middle class through a whole litany of whether it's NAFTA or discussing TPP, discussing the globalization and the offshoring of a lot of manufacturing jobs. What jobs are they supposed to go to?
Yeah.
Where are they supposed to go? And so what we find is that, and this is it's an irritating point for me, but what we find is that it's like the Roman satirist Juvenal said: "Give the people bread in circuses, and they'll never revolt." So if I just keep you fed and I give you a little bit of entertainment and distraction via social media and all the nonsense that's on there, you don't buck the system for the most part. And that's what you've got. You got a whole litany of Americans that are so distracted from nonsense that it's like corporations are pulling the wool over your eyes, and they propagandize a whole litany of individuals. And it's just, when you've taken, when you, when Morbius has offered you the pill to go back to sleep in the matrix, or you can be awake, and you're like trying to converse with other people, it's tough.
Yeah. I want to double back to something you said because I do think it's interesting that again the same article I read said that the top 3 private sector occupations in the next decade are going to be home healthcare and personal health aides, fast food and counter workers, and retail salespeople. I believe from my research, it seems like those unionization rates are much, much lower, which does contribute to this idea that these are sort of like less good, quote unquote, jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a sort of interesting because I assume if you go back in history and you look to some of these manufacturing careers that now we seem to have such a like almost fetish for, we're like nostalgic for the days when America did have a strong sort of homegrown domestic production capacity and economy. Um, those jobs are only good because people fought for it and fought to have good union protected jobs. And it just seems interesting that we're in a moment where, again, maybe AI is taking over the white collar workers. We've already offshored our manufacturing, and despite Trump's efforts, I don't really think it's coming back. And so, if the world of work are these service sectors, they seem like they need to be unionized, but we have a reticence too because they're not quote unquote good jobs. I'm curious if you know anything about the unionization rates in those industries, or if you know anything about how the perception of like good jobs changed in the manufacturing sector as they became unionized.
So the first part, which was about the unionization rates, I would say that what you'll start to see is a shift in the way that we perceive work in general. I think that what you're going to find is that individuals are, and you already see it now anyway. There's a there's more young people who would say things like livable wage. I want, I mean, there's a joke, right? For Christmas, I don't want, I don't need a big screen TV. I'd like rent control, please, or you want to pay one of my bills. Because what's happening again, going back to the social compact, it's all breaking down. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to start to see people deviate from this discussion of what's a good job, and you're going to start to see, hey, how much money does this company make, and how much money are like you start to see those charts where the productivity and the amount of money go up, but the amount of money that's paid to the employees is fairly stagnant. So I think you're going to start seeing that. And I think that we need to frame the definition of what we need to reframe, I should say, what is good work. I need to sustain my family off of something. It doesn't mean that like not everybody's cut out to be an iron worker. Not everybody's cut out to be a pipe fitter and electrician. These jobs are more physically demanding, some of them more than others. So, and not everybody's cut out for these, but other people are, meant to do X, Y, or Z, right? And so I think that we need to basically reframe the way we look at what it constitutes a good job, and look at, we want fellow Americans to basically be able to support their families and not have to work two or three different jobs for this express purpose. While you've got, what I'll say is, we don't even, if we had, to be blunt with you, if there were two things that were still in existence today, which are the post World War II capitalist market and American patriotism, then you would still have, even to this day, a robust manufacturing base and a whole litany of individuals that had great jobs. But we don't have capitalism.
Mhm.
We have corporatism. We have crony capitalism, and it's being exploited to a significant degree. And so that creates this systemic problem now. I think that you're probably going to start to see that as people feel, these young people feel like they don't have any hope, you're going to start, that's the most dangerous type of person in the room. The people that feel like they don't have anything left to lose, they're the ones. That's why young people, in a nutshell, are so pro union, because they see the system as it's boxed in, and they see the system as not working for them. And quite frankly, the only real substantive potential change they could have is going to be to come together. So these service industry jobs, I would expect that you're going to start to see a lot of pushback on. I mean, you're already seeing it ever since, like, what was it, October of 2022, when you started to see what they called Striketober. That's continuing on, and you're starting to see uh, an uptick in union activity. That's because all these people feel like they have no other avenue to turn. And guess what? They're absolutely right. They don't
Yeah.
have any other avenue to turn.
I recently saw a tweet, or it was somebody like when SNAP benefits were cut and paused, and somebody was like, "Well, it's not the government's job to feed you." And then somebody responded that was basically like, "What's the point of having a society if we're like not making sure our neighbors aren't going hungry?" And I think it's sort of like a similar ethos of like, "What's the point of a society if my neighbor has to work three jobs to live here? Like, what are we doing anymore?"
Yeah. Well, little did I know that the term, like the term rent seeking. So I've got a couple of podcast episodes. I think I'm gonna explore that comment, that that context of that comment. But rent seeking is this idea where I'm looking to gain a lot of money without creating any real wealth. And so that's why you see, like, I was looking at this statistic up the other day where it's like, I single family homes have still led the charge in the housing market, but there was a 70% increase in units that were fifty units or more. So in other words, somebody sees something in the economy where, like, let's up this idea of these apartments and stuff because that's all these people are going to be able to afford. And so the reason I bring this up is because I'll have conversations with apprentices and I'm like, what are you guys paying for rent and all this kind of stuff, and they're telling me this astronomical stuff, and I'm going, I've got a house that my wife and I lived in for a long time before we bought this one. And I rented out to a couple of young guys that I know from our church. And I don't charge them, we charge them hardly nothing, to be honest with you. And people are like, man, you can make more money. And I'm like, yeah, but I can't look another human being in the eye and go, I'm going to rip the pound of flesh off of you every month. Just like it's despicable. I'm looking at another human being, but that's what we have in this country. We have the largest inequality gulf, and it just continues to grow. And it's quite clear in numerous contexts that government has effectively failed in so many ways to curb that. And so the only real recourse people have, which I will say is probably the only real recourse they're going to have, is going to have long lasting substantial power, is to come together and organize. It's to come together and organize. When you look at the decline of the middle class, it coincided with the decline of unionism. I mean, there were two wings of the same bird going down. So it's not hard to see and figure this out. You
Yeah.
know, yeah.
You mentioned young people that you work with a few times. And you mentioned that they seem and feel more open to unionization. Do you, are you hopeful, I guess, with the new generation? And along with that, what can you remind me what actually decreased union rates so drastically?
So one of the one of the major declines in unionization obviously was globalization and the offshoring of, when you open up, and this is the problem with globalization, this idea that we can't protect American jobs, if you will, because we're competing against, like, let's say, China's lack of environmental control, and they sure as heck don't care about human beings and whatever. So when they start offshoring all these jobs, to just turn right around and bring the stuff right back here, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So you start seeing all these jobs going away, and that is a significant part of the erosion of that. And I'll piggyback on that to say, remember I said that the baby boomers are the me generation. So it's telling to me the number of individuals who are part of the baby boomer class who, number one, were also part of the me generation. They were, to be honest with you, I'll say it this way, and then I'll go back to why I believe young people are very pro union. When when you look at people who talk about quote unquote free market capitalism, number one, free market does not exist. That's a misnomer. So anytime they talk about a specific piece of legislation that they like, it's from a political or economical perspective that they want to see put out there. But on the same time, if they are adverse to a particular piece of legislation, it's because they think it inhibits their particular growth. And I'll say it this way. I've been thinking about this for a while. They worship an economic model. They worship an economic model. And that's why I can say confidently that what we've done is we put up this economic model that Americans must uphold, as opposed to the economic model supporting Americans in their lifestyle. And when you go back to younger people and why I'm so adamant and why I believe that they're more pro union, first off, the statistics bear that out. But secondly, if you go back to the baby boomers, they grew up in an unprecedented time. And so they amass all this wealth and everything like this. And there's a threshold for being uncomfortable. And anti-union individuals are very good and adept at trying to keep people right at that threshold so that you don't buck the system. And if you got a lot to lose, you don't say a whole lot. You don't try. And so baby boomers have all this stuff, right? Gen X comes along and they're a smaller generation and they grow up in a very tumultuous time with the civil rights and Vietnam and all this other stuff. And so their outlook is a little bit different than baby boomers, maybe not as optimistic, and they're dealing with all this and they have amassed some wealth, but it's not like they're smaller. So it's not like the baby boomers. And then the millennials come along, and by and part, the millennials are the generation that was really sold the bill of goods that you got to go to college to get a good job. And so you turn people into economic slaves. Well, now I have less discretionary spending to go get a house, to go do whatever. So millennials have, each successive generation has less and less to hold on to. And then you get to Gen Z, and Gen Z got the short end of the stick. You got so many of Gen Z they never even make it out of working class. Working class is just, I got enough money to pay my bills and that's it. I have no free money to do anything else. And then you have the working poor below that. They never even really get ahead. They can never even fully pay their bills. And so when you have a generation like that cannot get ahead, and they don't really have any real assets to amass in the first place. Well, I don't have anything to lose. And so I live underneath this corporatist system that does not enable me any kind of mobility at all. It feels like the system's rigged. It's probably because it is. And never mind that the threshold of being comfortable, that you can blow that out the water with a lot of Gen Z. And then the social compact has obviously been broken down because of numerous reasons, right? You got older people who've got a tremendous amount of wealth, and you don't have hardly anything, and there's no real way for you to move up. You don't have a livable wage. There's not a job for you to kind of traverse to, because these service jobs are supposed to be just stepping stones, if you will. But where's the next job to go to? All of this is this big, gigantic ball of, oh, check this out. We are seeing young people pro-union in droves. And the reason, it's just all of that stuff combined, right? They're looking at the whole paradigm and saying, well, I feel like the whole system is rigged against me. And if the whole system is rigged against me, to hell with the system that I happen to be under. I want another system. And I don't believe that socialism is the answer, but the answer to the corporate capitalism system that we're underneath right now is 100% pro-union. Mm-hmm. It's 100% pro-union. That's how like I say, they're participating in wealth extraction. They're extracting the wealth out of the lower and siphoning it up to those in the upper class. That's what they're doing. And unionism in general is, in my mind, the most effective weapon. I mean, I've seen governmental law being challenged over and over and over again. The FTC's ban on non-competes has been effectively sidelined. The Department of Labor raising up the amount that the threshold for availability for overtime for salaried workers, that's being challenged in court. OSHA is continually, like every year there's a senator out of, I think it's Arizona, who puts in one line. His bill is to repeal OSHA. Like, all of these are governmental laws, and they're not safe. But you know what is? The collective power of the people. That's what's really going to drive change, if we're going to have any change at all in this country.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah. Well, I think that might be a nice note to end on.
This will be the fastest conversation I have ever had, because I can never get conversations down under an hour. It's usually, hour and 10, hour and 20 minutes.
I keep asking you questions, but I feel like this might make it a nice length to read and listen to, but you tell me.
It's fine. I mean, we can pick this. Look, I said in the email, right, that you might find that this is far more enjoyable to have this discussion and want to do it on a semi-recurring basis or whatever. It just gives me something it gives me something to do. It gives me something to record. It gives you something to put out on Frank News. So there's a lot of value there.
I really appreciate this. I love your insights, and I do think the conversation piece of it is nicer, and I totally get how it's easier also, just from a personal level. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. I really appreciate your time today, Rusty, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to get behind the mic and to be able to have what I think are substantive, informative, engaging conversations that we need to get out there and have more people listen to. So
Hell yeah. Awesome.
thanks. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Okay.
Okay. Talk to you soon.